The city skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nathan Caldwell's penthouse office, all steel and silver light in the early dusk. From this height the world looked manageable, ordered, silent, just the way he liked it. His phone buzzed once on the glass desk, then again and again. Nathan lifted it with a clipped sigh, recognizing the number as his son's school, a place that had been calling him far too often since autumn began. He answered with a polite detachment honed from years of boardrooms and negotiation tables. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, I'm calling about Mason, again. Nathan exhaled, a slow, measured breath that masked the edge of guilt. What is it this time? There was a pause on the line, the kind that suggested the woman on the other end was tired, not annoyed, not disrespectful, just genuinely exhausted. He's fallen behind in most of his core subjects. He's not disruptive, but he's distant, and frankly, he doesn't seem to care if he fails or passes. We're worried. Nathan pinched the bridge of his nose. He didn't need reminding that his 11-year-old son had become increasingly remote since the divorce, since the quiet but swift unraveling of a life that had once been rooted in routine and nannies and holiday schedules, since Nathan's world had split neatly between home and work, only to find one side hollow when the other demanded more. I'll take care of it, he said. He ended the call before the vice principal could offer a polite thank you. He was already pulling up his calendar, shoving meetings into different slots, pausing only once when he reached the piano lesson reminder he never deleted from Mason's shared schedule. He stared at it for a beat too long before deleting it with a few quick taps. Half an hour later, he fired off a request to his assistant. Need a private tutor for my son, preferably one with experience in dealing with withdrawn or difficult kids, academic focus, STEM subjects, no fluff, start immediately. 2 days passed before Nathan found time to step out of the elevator onto the 32nd floor of his building, where the apartment he now shared with Mason stood in sleek contrast to the noise of the city below. Inside, the lights were dimmed, and a faint melody drifted through the air. It wasn't from the television or a stereo. It was live. Piano. He moved down the hall with cautious steps, loosening his tie. The sound pulled him in, sharp with memory, soft with something he couldn't name. As he entered the living room, the music came into view before the musician did. It was the baby grand piano tucked against the far wall, his ex-wife's idea, once decorative, now more sentimental than functional. Mason sat cross-legged on the rug, watching intently as someone played. Not a tutor. Not what he'd ordered. She wore a soft cardigan over black jeans and had dark curls pulled into a low bun. Her fingers moved across the keys with practiced grace, but not showiness. She wasn't performing. She was coaxing something gentle out of the silence, something personal. Nathan cleared his throat. The music stopped, abrupt as a door slamming. The woman stood, straightening, her cheeks flushed. Sorry, I didn't hear you come in, I'm Billy. He looked past her to Mason, who didn't seem even slightly bothered by the intrusion. If anything, he looked calmer, focused, as if this moment of music and quiet mattered more than any of the calls he never answered. I ordered a tutor, Nathan said. Billy didn't flinch. She had the kind of calm that wasn't passive, grounded but steady, and they sent me. He arched a brow. She smiled, not arrogantly, just enough to challenge him. I work with kids who have been through hard transitions, divorce, grief, academic failure. I use music as a bridge. I also teach math, by the way, but sometimes they need something else before they're ready for fractions. Nathan blinked. You're not on his schedule. I cleared it with your assistant, she said, 3 times. Mason looked up. She's cool, Dad. Cool, a word he hadn't heard from his son in weeks. Not since the last tantrum about leaving his old school. Not since the move, the new routines, the reshuffling of everything familiar. Nathan stepped further into the room. This isn't what I asked for. No, Billy said, it's what he needs. It was bold and it should have irritated him, but something in her voice, steady, patient, assured, disarmed him. She didn't speak like someone defending herself. She spoke like someone who knew how to listen and how to wait. Fine, he said almost too quickly, but I want progress in school. Billy nodded, then trust the process. As she packed up her satchel and gave Mason a high five on the way out, Nathan stood frozen beside the piano, hand grazing the wood. His fingers hovered over the keys a moment before pulling back. He couldn't remember the last time he'd played, or the last time his son had smiled like that. The next morning, Mason sat at the kitchen table, poking at cereal. Nathan stirred his coffee, watching him. "She'll be back today." Mason shrugged, but it wasn't dismissive, more like hope in disguise. "Same time." "Dunno." Nathan opened his phone and texted his assistant. "Keep me updated on Billy's schedule." He didn't know why it mattered, it just did. Rain tapped steadily against the window panes that afternoon, casting slow-moving shadows along the kitchen floor. Mason sat at the counter, pencil in hand, not doing much writing. Nathan stood by the coffee maker, tie still on, though he had no more meetings. He was watching. "You're just sitting there," he said. "I'm thinking." "Looks like stalling." Mason shrugged. "She lets me think." "See, Billy." Nathan hid his sigh behind a long sip of coffee. It was only the second session, but already his son talked about her like a familiar. Not a teacher, not even a guest, just someone who belonged. Nathan had made a career out of spotting risk early, eliminating variables, but Billy was something else. Not chaos, not control, just unfamiliar. He didn't like unfamiliar. The doorbell rang. Mason was off the stool before Nathan could move. By the time he reached the foyer, Billy had already stepped in, cheeks flushed from the rain. She carried a soaked canvas tote and a case that looked too big for the violin and too slim for a guitar. "You're early," Nathan said. "You're home." He didn't answer, just stepped aside so she could remove her boots and hand her coat to the wall hook without needing to be asked. Mason was already flipping open the case. A ukulele, bright teal, covered in marker signatures. Billy smiled when she caught him running his fingers along the strings. "I promised we'd trade one chord for one math problem," she said. Nathan folded his arms. That wasn't the agreement. "Sure it was," she said, already kneeling beside Mason, "just not in writing." He watched them from a distance, noting how she didn't hover. She knelt, not as a teacher with authority, but as someone entering the child's space willingly. She met him at eye level. The questions she asked weren't corrections, they were invitations. "3 times 4 is," she asked. 12, Mason said without hesitation. She handed him the uke. "That's a C chord, try it." Nathan blinked. He'd spent weeks looking at test scores, tutoring ads, reviewing apps with gamified learning. None of them had made Mason speak this quickly, or with this little resistance. By the time Nathan stepped back into his home office, Mason was half-humming through the bridge of a song he barely knew, and Billy was nodding in time, giving pointers only when needed. It should have annoyed him. Instead, he listened longer than he meant to. That evening, after Billy left, Nathan lingered by the piano. He wasn't sure what pulled him there. Maybe the sound still echoing through the room, or maybe the way Mason had touched the ukulele like it meant something, like it didn't have to be useful to be important. He pulled the cover off the keys. He sat. Then he played. Only a few notes, halting, rusty. A melody he couldn't name but knew by heart. It felt like stretching something long unused, something buried. The keys weren't just notes, they were weight and memory. Mason stepped into the room, socked feet quiet on the hardwood. "Mom used to play that one." Nathan stopped. He hadn't expected an audience. "I forgot I knew it," he said. Mason shrugged. "I didn't." They didn't talk more, they didn't need to. But Nathan felt it, the moment folding in on itself, quiet but significant, like a corner turning. Over the next week, Billy returned 4 times. Each visit was different. One day they worked through division problems while learning rhythm through clapping. Another day, she and Mason built a shoebox guitar using rubber bands and pencils while discussing the physics of sound. Nathan, despite himself, began adjusting his workday to end a little earlier. He didn't sit in on the lessons, but he passed by the living room more often, picked up extra groceries, noticing Billy took her tea with honey, not sugar, left a mug out before each session. He wasn't used to the sound of laughter in the apartment or to Mason talking during dinner, but both began to happen in small, irregular bursts. Nathan stopped trying to predict it, he just noticed. Then one night, Mason came into his office holding a worksheet. "Can you help with this one?" Nathan looked up, surprised. "You sure you don't want Billy for that?" "She already helped, I just want to check it." He took the paper. It was a long division problem, already neatly worked out, correctly. "You did good," he said. Mason looked pleased, not smug, just quietly proud. And Nathan realized he hadn't seen that look in a long time. The next session began with Billy arriving late. "Traffic," she said, cheeks flushed. She seemed flustered, her normal calm disrupted. Nathan met her at the door, studying her face with a frown. "You okay?" She hesitated. "Just a rough morning, my uncle in the hospital. I had to make a stop." She waved off his concern, but he didn't move. "You want to reschedule?" She looked at him then, long enough that something passed between them. Not romantic, not yet, just unguarded, like she hadn't expected the offer to be genuine. "No," she said, "I'm here now, that's what matters." She taught that day without music. No ukulele, no piano, just words, simple math games, riddles, and conversations. But the silence between notes mattered too, Nathan realized. Billy didn't always need instruments to change a room, she just needed to be present. That night after Mason was asleep, Nathan found her still packing up by the door. He stood with one hand in his pocket, uncertain. "Do you want to come back even if we're not your usual kind of client?" She zipped her bag slowly. "You're exactly my kind of client." He didn't ask what that meant, not directly, but her eyes softened and she gave him a nod that felt like more than thanks. Then she was gone. And he stood there, wondering why it suddenly felt like the apartment was too quiet again. He started coming home earlier, sometimes with dinner, once with a new ukulele because Billy had said hers was barely holding together. She looked surprised when he handed it over. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She ran her hand across the wood, then looked at him for a beat longer than she needed to. At night, Nathan began pulling old sheet music from the bench, playing softly after Mason fell asleep. Not often, not perfectly, just enough. One Sunday, Billy brought cookies. A dozen, wrapped in wax paper, handed to Mason with a wink. "These are bribes," she said. "There's a hard problem on page 6. Nathan noticed she wore no makeup that day. No earrings. Just her and her laugh and the easy way she filled a room without needing to take anything from it. "You're staying for dinner," Nathan said that night. It wasn't a question. She smiled, "Okay." He cooked, Mason set the table. Billy told a story about a music camp in Vermont that made Mason laugh so hard he nearly choked on his juice. Nathan found himself laughing too, a sound he hadn't realized was foreign in his own home. As the evening slowed and Billy helped wash dishes, her hands in his sink, shoulder brushing his, Nathan realized he hadn't checked his work email once all day. And he didn't miss it. The first snowfall stuck the following Friday. Billy arrived with snow in her curls, cheeks flushed, coat open because she'd rushed up from the train station. Mason met her at the door holding a gift-wrapped box. "It's not Christmas yet," she said. "It's not from me," Mason said. "It's from Dad." Billy looked up, surprised. Nathan stood behind him, something unreadable in his face. "Open it." Inside was a metronome, old, polished wood and brass, classical, heavy. She lifted it out gently. "I found it in a storage box from my college days," Nathan said. "Used to keep time for everything, even when I wasn't playing." "It's beautiful," she whispered. She didn't cry, not exactly, but she blinked more than once before setting it down and stepping forward to hug him. He let her, then after a moment, he wrapped his arms around her too. Not out of obligation. Out of knowing. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Mason thrived in the warmth of her presence. Nathan found himself sharing more than he intended about work, his parents, how he never meant to become someone so distant from his own life. "You know," she said once, fingers curled around her mug, "you're allowed to want more than success." He stared at her, the words stirring something unspoken inside him. "I used to think success meant stability. And now," he shook his head, "now I think it might just mean stillness, peace, something that doesn't make my son flinch." Billy touched his hand, not as comfort, just a reminder she was still there. That night they kissed. It wasn't dramatic. No fireworks, no music, just two people standing in a room that had grown too full of shared silences not to lean into each other. It was tentative, gentle, real. Afterward, Billy didn't rush away. She helped Mason into bed, humming quietly as he drifted off. Then she stood in the doorway of Nathan's room, waiting. He didn't ask her to stay. She already had. January arrived quietly. Gone was the sharp rush of holiday urgency. The city moved slower now, like it had exhaled after weeks of holding its breath. And inside the Caldwell apartment, things held a different kind of stillness, not empty, not cold, settled. Billy had started bringing her own slippers when she visited, left a scarf draped over the coat rack. Mason asked fewer questions about when she was coming next, because now she just did. Sometimes she stayed for dinner, sometimes she didn't, but she was never fully gone anymore. Nathan adjusted without realizing. He started cooking with real ingredients. He kept fresh fruit on the counter. He started waking up 5 minutes earlier than his alarm just to stand outside Mason's door and listen for the faint hum of Billy's voice from the living room, soft and half-spoken as she coaxed notes from the keys for the day's lesson. The apartment, once echoing and spare, was full in ways that had nothing to do with square footage. One Thursday afternoon, Billy and Mason were working on something different, not chords or equations, but storytelling through music. Nathan paused on his way through the room, catching only snippets. "And how does it feel?" she was asking. "Not what it means, what it feels like." Mason frowned, thought, then he played a few uncertain notes. "Good," she said. "Try again, but slower, don't rush the feeling." Nathan lingered just long enough to watch Mason play something that sounded familiar, then strange, then beautiful in its own quiet way. A song forming out of hesitation. That night Billy stayed for a late dinner. Mason begged to make dessert, a half-collapsed chocolate cake from a boxed mix. They ate it on the couch, paper plates and all, and laughed when it fell apart mid-slice. Billy leaned back, legs folded beneath her. "I've been thinking," she said, glancing at Nathan over her mug, "about not taking any new clients this semester." Nathan blinked. "Is that wise?" "I don't know yet," she said, "but it feels right." Mason didn't look up from his plate, but his grin said everything. A few weeks later, Billy invited them both to a small performance at a community music hall on the edge of Brooklyn. It was part of a series she helped organize. Nothing flashy, folding chairs, makeshift stage, kids with more nerves than polish. Mason was quiet the whole train ride there. He carried the notebook she'd given him, fingers worrying the spine. When it was his turn, Billy gave him no speech. Just a small squeeze of his shoulder and a look that said, "You already know how." Nathan sat in the front row, hands clasped tight. He'd spoken at global conferences, pitched billion-dollar ideas, and signed deals in cities he barely remembered. But watching his son walk onto that stage, ukulele in hand, heart visibly beating beneath his sweater, nothing had ever leveled him more. Mason played a 2-minute song. No flash, no practiced smile. Just the words he'd once written in the safety of their living room. Words about starting over, about how quiet can feel loud, about remembering things that used to be lost. The room was still when he finished. Then came the softest applause Nathan had ever heard, not polite but full. Billy beamed at him when he stepped off stage. She didn't need to say anything. Mason leaned into her hug with his whole weight. Later, walking back to the train, Nathan fell into step beside her. The wind was sharp, but she didn't flinch from it. "You changed him," he said. She looked over. No, he just needed permission. Nathan slipped his hand into hers. "And me?" he asked, quiet. She didn't answer right away, just squeezed his fingers once. "You gave yourself permission." Spring crept in slow, the sharp chills softened. The air carried the scent of wet earth and something blooming. Billy didn't move in. They didn't talk about next steps. But she had a drawer now, a toothbrush, sheet music she left beside the piano half finished. One morning Mason handed Nathan an envelope sealed in bright blue ink. Inside was a printed flyer. A summer music retreat, Vermont, open to kids, families, mentors. Nathan read it twice, then looked up to see Billy watching him carefully. "I thought maybe the three of us could go," she said. It wasn't a question. Mason sat beside her, holding his breath without knowing it. Nathan folded the flyer and set it on the counter. "All right," he said. Just like that. Because what once had been noise, the schedules, the guilt, the pressure, had quieted. What remained was music, a new kind of rhythm, tentative, honest, true. Months from now there would be more, days full of travel, lessons that turned into memories, disagreements softened by trust. But none of it needed to be written yet. What mattered had already begun. A man who had once ordered a tutor to fix a son he barely knew had gotten something else entirely. A musician. And in her voice, in her presence, in the music she brought into their home, he remembered something he'd forgotten. That people aren't problems to be solved. They're songs waiting to be heard. And now finally he was listening.